I asked myself that in the kitchen, one palm braced against the cool metal of the shutter while my other hand guided the hinge into place. The whole house smelled like dust, shaken from books and old wood that had been dragged across the floor too many times. October 15th, a date I could recite without looking, meant full moon, and full moon meant lockdown. 22 years in Graybridge had made the rhythm part of my bones. James, can you help me with the kitchen window? Mom balanced on the step stool, apron tied tight, jaw set the way it gets when she pretends she isn't afraid. I slid the board into its brackets. The hinge groaned, a low throat sound that traveled the length of our small kitchen and ended with a click that felt like a door sealing on the world. "These things get heavier every time," she muttered. They didn't. We did. Or maybe the month did. Stella came in with her arms full of cans. 16, fast on her feet, but her eyes kept cutting toward the glass before the shutters closed. "Living room?" she asked. "Stack them by the couch," Mom said. The afternoon moved like a chore you do in a dream. Dresser against the front door until it bit grooves into the wood. Dad's old table shoved to the back door, the legs complaining in a deep scrape. Chairs tucked where we wouldn't trip in the dark. We had done this so often the house felt smaller before the sun had even slanted. By the time I made the last pass, latches checked, boards snug, shutters tight, the horizon had turned copper and then iron. The lamp threw a tired pool of yellow over Mom and Stella's faces. "Lights out in 10, Mom said. We didn't argue. The rules were simple and they worked. No lights, no voices above a whisper, no mistakes. 7:58, 7:59, 8. The click was soft, but the darkness swallowed whole. Nothing in it to adjust to, no thread of streetlight through slats, no seam around the door, just black that felt like felt, pressed against the eyes. I heard Stella's breath, the polite creak of the couch under Mom, the old house deciding it was done with sound. In this part, I told myself, because it helps to narrate when you can't see, you will see the ritual we trust, the pressure we can't name, and the first wrong sound. We faced the front of the house, though there was nothing to look at. I kept my hands flat on my knees. There's a posture you adopt on lockdown nights that makes your body into a taut answer. I'm here. I'm still. I'm small. 9 o'clock slid by in a hush so complete I could hear the wall clock without seeing it. Around 9:30, the change arrived, not as noise, but as weight. It started in my ears like altitude and then seeped into shoulders, ribs, knees, making each breath misbehave. "Do you feel that?" Stella whispered. "Shh," Mom said, too quick. I felt it anyway. The pressure wasn't new. We had lived with its cousin on other full moons. But tonight, it was like the sky leaned closer. I pictured the moon through roof and shutter, like a pale eye with no eyelid, watching, not shining. Bigger in the mind than it could be in the sky. By 11, water had claimed the air. Not literal water, no damp. Just that submerged effort it takes to raise an arm against a current you can't see. My lungs pushed back against breath. Every muscle said no, then someone screamed. It came from 2 or 3 houses away, high enough to crack, long enough to be real, and then it cut clean. We didn't move. The scream wasn't part of the routine. That was the worst part. "What was that?" Stella breathed. Nobody moved, the way you freeze when you hear glass fall and wait for the next piece. We waited and got nothing. The silence after was wrong, bright on the ears. The town always went quiet on full moons, but this was a kind that felt curated, like someone had turned a dial down and kept their hand on it. My heartbeat took over the job of measuring time. I counted to steady myself and lost the count when the next noise arrived. Scraping. Not skitter. Not footsteps. Scraping. Something heavy pulled across gravel with the patience of a person who doesn't get tired. Left to right, slow, as if it needed us to understand the route it was taking past our house. 2 minutes, maybe more. The sound rode the siding and moved on. When it faded, the silence swelled back up to fill the hole it left. Leather groaned under me when I shifted. Too loud in the dark. All 3 of us went still like we were back in a game of statues, and the floor was a stage that gave us away. Midnight hung there. The pressure didn't break like it sometimes does. It pressed harder. I had felt hands on my shoulders like this once when an older kid pinned me for a joke. This felt like that kid had learned the trick of the air. 1 o'clock. Footsteps this time. Slow, deliberate, long pauses between steps as if ankles didn't bend the way ours do. Not the hurried trot of someone late to safety. The kind of gait that belongs to people who can afford to arrive after everyone else has locked their doors. The steps came, considered our house, stopped directly in front. Stella's fingers found my wrist and closed there, tendons violin tight. Mom's breathing was a suggestion, not a sound. 30 beats. 40. The steps resumed, gravel shifting. They curved into our driveway without touching the metal trash can we always forgot to bring in on lockdown days. I heard weight on the porch boards. The old pine gave a tiny complaint where it sags. The knob rattled. Not hard. Not urgent. A polite test to see whether we understood our own rules. It stopped. Then the tapping started along the front shutters. Fingertips or knuckles searching for seams, testing screw heads, a gentle percussion that moved window to window like a person advised by a list. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap, tap. I knew the exact path it took without sight. Living room, dining room, small office Mom never uses because it faces the street. The tapping slid away, down the side of the house to the kitchen. There it changed. Something brushed the siding with long strokes from the foundation up. The sweep was careful, exploratory like a hand learning a face in the dark. What is it doing? Stella's voice was the size of a thread. Mom didn't answer. The brushing kept mapping us. Every law we lived by was making noise inside my head. Don't speak, don't stand, don't light. The lamp sat beside us like a remembered friend we weren't allowed to acknowledge. The pressure rose again, and with it came another sound far down the block. A door opening and closing once, soft, disciplined, as if whoever it belonged to had rehearsed. After, the neighborhood exhaled nothing at all. I swallowed and tasted metal. The brushing reached the back, another pause. Then the sound of something larger settling its weight near the kitchen door. Wood knows when something heavy leans against it. It makes the quietest, most honest sound. We heard that. I pictured the layout in my head the way Dad taught me when he made me memorize it. Front door, oak, reinforced, dresser braced. Windows bolted, shuttered inside. Back door, solid, but a hair softer where the frame had swelled last spring after rain. Our smallest weakness had a shape and an address. The house felt smaller than a throat. I didn't know what the moon was doing above us. I knew exactly what our floor did beneath my shoes, where it creaked, where it didn't. I ground my heels against the boards to keep from standing. Mom shifted 1 inch closer to Stella and touched her elbow. The first impact didn't come. Yet. That would be another night. Tonight, the teaching was different. Tonight, something learned us. A soft scrape along the back hinges, a slow pull where paint had sealed a seam, a test of the latch from outside that didn't try to break so much as listen for where the noise traveled. The mapping was patient, almost patient enough to read as mercy. Almost. I thought of the town's old sayings, the ones the adults said like jokes. No porch lights on full moons, no music, no calls. Don't name what you think you hear. The rules weren't superstition. They were how you survived attention. My legs burned from staying still. My jaw ached where I held my teeth tight enough to keep breath silent. The air worked like thick cloth inside my chest, resisting any motion that looked like life. Stella loosened her grip, just enough for blood to return to my fingers. How long? She mouthed, though I couldn't see it. I felt the question more than heard it. I counted 10 slow heartbeats and gave the smallest squeeze. Not an answer, just proof that the signal still ran between us. Outside, the brushing stopped. Weight left the door. A step withdrew. Another followed it. Gravel accepted it back. The steps moved around the corner, tracing the edge of our house like a fingertip around a glass. In the black, the clock's hands moved. Whatever was outside did too. When I finally let air into my lungs without feeling like I was breaking a rule, the pressure didn't vanish. It pressed and pressed and pressed until I was sure the night had learned our names and chosen not to say them, yet. The silence that followed had more meaning than any scream I had ever heard. It said, "I know where to knock next time." And the night wasn't halfway over. Morning was supposed to fix things. That's what years of surviving full moons had taught us. Endure the dark, wait for dawn, breathe sunlight, and act like nothing happened. But the moment the first thin line of light leaked around the shutters, I knew something about this one had stayed behind. Mom stood before the window, her fingers tight on the latch. "Ready?" she asked, though we all knew the answer didn't matter. I nodded. Stella just stared at her hands. The latch stuck once, twice, then gave. The shutters creaked outward, spilling gold light into the living room like it had been waiting outside all night, impatient to rush in. The air inside changed immediately. Lighter, yes, but off too, as if it had been trapped too long in the same lungs. We all blinked against the brightness, half blind, half relieved. I looked first at the Peterson house across the street. Habit, I guess. We'd grown up with them. Same routines, same half-wave when we passed on the way to work or school. The place looked normal from here. White siding, green trim, porch swing that always sagged to one side. But there was no movement, no smell of breakfast, no sound. "Mom," I said quietly. She came up beside me, shading her eyes against the light. "Do you see anyone?" She hesitated. "No." Maybe they were still sleeping, maybe, but the Petersons didn't sleep late. By this hour, Mr. Tal Peterson would already be on his porch getting the paper. Stella appeared behind us, rubbing her arms like she was cold. "Can I open the back windows?" "Go ahead," Mom said. We let light into the rest of the house, one window at a time. Each latch, each hinge, each creak of shifting wood sounded too loud, like we were breaking some fragile agreement we'd made with the night. When everything was open, the house looked wrong in its own sunlight, like a place that had spent too much time holding its breath. "I'll check outside," I said. Mom didn't argue, but her eyes followed me the whole way to the door. The morning air was sharp enough to sting. Dew clung to the grass, catching the sun in a million tiny sparks. Birds were already arguing in the trees, a sound that should have comforted me. It didn't, because beneath it all, the quiet I'd felt last night was still there, deeper than before, humming low under the noise of the world. I crossed the yard toward the Peterson place. The closer I got, the more that wrongness sharpened. The windows were intact. The door closed. Everything looked untouched, except for the lawn. At the center of the yard, the grass had been disturbed. A perfect circle, maybe 10 feet across. Fresh dirt showed through the torn blades, dark and damp as if it had been churned by a shovel. Around the edge of the circle, stones had been placed, smooth, round, river stones that didn't belong here. Someone had set them with surgical precision, spacing exact gaps even, forming a border that was too deliberate to ignore. It wasn't vandalism. It was ritual. "James," Mom called from the porch. "What are you looking at?" "Come see this." She joined me, her shoes crunching the dry leaves. When she saw the circle, she stopped cold. "What in the world?" "I don't know," I said, "but they're gone." We stood there together, neither of us stepping any closer. The stones gleamed white against the soil, catching the light in a way that hurt the eyes if you looked too long. Back inside, the house smelled faintly metallic. I washed my hands twice before I realized I hadn't touched anything. "I need to get to work," I said finally. Mom nodded, distracted. She stayed by the window, staring across the street long after I left. The road to the grain mill was quiet. A few other people walked the same route, each wearing that hollow look that comes after a lockdown. The air felt heavier than usual, even in daylight. The mill's concrete bulk rose at the town's edge, its gray walls mottled with years of weather and grain dust. It used to feel safe, a structure that could withstand anything. That morning, even it looked smaller. Tanner and Dallas were already at the loading dock, standing too close together, again, talking in the low voices men use when they don't want to admit they're scared. "Morning," I said. Both turned to me at once. Tanner's face was drawn, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. Dallas's hands shook slightly as he adjusted his gloves. "How was your night?" Tanner asked. "Quiet," I lied. "Yours?" Dallas gave a sharp laugh with no humor. Peterson family's missing. I froze mid-step. What do you mean, missing? Tanner's jaw tightened. Sheriff went by their place this morning. No answer, no sign of them. House locked from the inside. The circle flashed through my mind. The dirt, the stones. You see anything strange last night? Dallas asked. I hesitated. Heard a scream. Around 11, both men nodded. We heard it too, Tanner said. And other things. What other things? Dallas looked around before answering. Footsteps, doors opening, that dragging sound again. The hair on my arms lifted. Whatever we'd heard, it wasn't isolated. How many families? I asked. Just the Petersons so far. Sheriff's checking the rest of town today. I wanted to tell them about the circle, but stopped myself. Saying it out loud made it real. The rest of the morning passed in fragments. Machines running, men pretending to work, eyes darting toward the windows. No one talked above a murmur. When a truck backfired in the distance, half the crew flinched. By afternoon, the talk had changed from disbelief to fear. I heard pieces of conversations as I passed. Getting worse, they're stronger now, barriers can't hold like before. Each phrase settled on me like grit. 3 days later, the whispers had grown teeth. The Peterson house stayed empty. No word from the sheriff. At the mill, Tanner mentioned a nearby town, Millfield, where 3 families had vanished overnight. Doors left open, he said. Cars in the driveways. Dallas slammed a sack of grain onto the truck bed harder than necessary. Whatever's happening, it's spreading. That word, spreading, echoed in the hollow space behind my ribs. I walked home that evening through streets that felt thinner somehow, like the edges between houses were eroding. People moved faster, heads down. Every window seemed to have fresh boards nailed across it. When I turned onto our street, Mom was outside with a roll of tar paper and a tube of caulk, sealing the gaps around the kitchen window. She didn't even look up. What are you doing? I asked, though I knew. Making sure nothing gets through, she said. Her hands shook slightly as she pressed the black material into place. Not even air. I stood there, watching her cover the tiny cracks, lines so thin you'd miss them if you didn't go looking. Is that really necessary? She turned. The fear in her eyes was something I'd never seen from her before, raw, unhidden. Yes, she said, it's necessary. That was the moment I realized the adults weren't pretending anymore. Whatever we'd been told about the full moons being routine scene safety measures was only half the truth. Inside, Stella sat on the couch with her homework spread in front of her, but wasn't writing. Her pencil rolled to a stop as I entered. Where's the Peterson family? She asked. I sat down across from her. I don't know. They're not coming back, are they? I hesitated. No, I said finally. She nodded once, accepting it like she'd already known. Mom was talking to Mrs. Henderson, she added quietly. She said something about getting us out before it's too late. The words landed in my chest like stones in water. Pack a bag, I told her. Don't let Mom see, just in case. Her eyes widened, but she didn't argue. She slipped upstairs, her footsteps light on the creaking stairs. From the kitchen, I could hear Mom still working, the rhythmic scrape of the putty knife, the whisper of paper against glass. The sound didn't comfort me. It sounded like panic trying to disguise itself as preparation. That night, I lay awake, the darkness alive with the memory of pressure and tapping, and for the first time in my life, I wanted to see the moon, to know if it was still looking back. At the mill the next morning, the air carried that uneasy quiet of people pretending to focus. Machinery hummed, belts turned, but no one sang or shouted over the noise anymore. Fear worked like fine dust. It got into everything. Tanner approached me near the storage area carrying a box of tools. Need a hand, he said simply. He didn't look like he'd slept. I followed him outside to the loading dock where Dallas was measuring the tall windows with a tape measure. We're boarding these, Tanner explained. Extra protection. For what? I asked, though I already knew. Dallas didn't look up from his measurements. Full moon's early this month. 28th. My stomach tightened. That's 6 days. Tanner nodded. After what happened to the Petersons, no one's taking chances. We worked in silence, fitting boards and driving nails. The dull thud of hammers echoed like a heartbeat inside the concrete walls. When a crow landed on the roof beam and cawed, half the men jumped. By noon, the mill's big windows were sealed, shutting out daylight until the interior glowed dull and gray like an underwater space. We sat on overturned grain buckets during lunch. Dallas poked at his sandwich. "My wife wants to leave," he said. "Take the kids to her sister's in Colorado." "What'd you tell her?" Tanner asked. "I told her I'd think about it." He sighed, his breath leaving white mist in the cold air. "But if whatever this is can reach 40 miles to Millfield, how far is far enough?" Tanner didn't answer. None of us did. When I got home, Mom was rearranging our emergency supplies with military precision. Canned goods, water jugs, the battery radio we never turned on. The stacks looked higher than before. "This seems like more than usual," I said. "Better too much than too little," she replied, moving a can a fraction of an inch before stepping back. Outside, the whole street echoed with the same sounds. Hammers, scraping wood, murmured voices. For the first time in my life, lockdown prep felt like war prep. Not a routine, but a defense line. "Mom," I said, "Stella told me you were talking to Mrs. Henderson about leaving." Her hands froze mid-motion. She set down a can of soup slowly. "Just discussing options," she said. "What kind of options?" She turned that her face pale under the kitchen light. "The kind where we might have to make quick decisions." There was no point pressing her. The tone in her voice wasn't up for argument. That night I heard her downstairs long after we'd gone to bed. Furniture scraped, locks clicked, hinges groaned. Every hour or so the floorboards creaked under her pacing. She didn't sleep. The next day at the mill, Tanner met me at the door with a look that told me I didn't want to hear what he was about to say. "The Kowalskis are gone," he said. "East side of town, house empty this morning. 5 people, parents, 2 teenagers, a grandmother. I saw them every Sunday on the way to church. Gone?" I repeated, though the word had started to lose meaning. Dallas joined us, his face gray with fatigue. "No signs of a break-in. No footprints in the yard. Like they just stepped out of their lives." Tanner ran a hand through his hair. "That's 8 people in 2 weeks. "Sheriff's calling it voluntary relocation," Dallas said bitterly. "Says families are leaving for economic reasons." We stared at him. None of us laughed. "You don't abandon your house and car because you're broke," Tanner muttered. The rest of the day went by in mechanical movements, lifting, stacking, pretending to work. Every few minutes, someone would glance toward the windows as if expecting something to look back. The boards we'd nailed up yesterday didn't feel like enough anymore. When I got home, Mom and Stella were in the hallway, arguing in hushed voices. "No going near windows no matter what you hear," Mom said. "But my room. You stay downstairs, bathroom, kitchen, living room. That's it. Mom, you're scaring me," Stella whispered. "Good," Mom said flat. "You should be." I froze where I stood. Mom had never said anything like that, not once in all the years of lockdowns. She turned toward me, eyes rimmed red. "Everything's changed," she said quietly. "We can't count on the old rules anymore." That night, the neighborhood didn't sleep. Lights glowed behind boarded windows as people moved furniture, sealed cracks, whispered through walls. The sound of hammering carried into the small hours. Graybridge wasn't a town anymore. It was a collection of sealed boxes holding people who'd stopped believing in dawn. Sleep wouldn't come. When it finally did, I dreamed of the Petersons' front yard, the circle of stones glowing white against the earth like teeth. I woke before dawn with the memory of that circle etched behind my eyelids. By breakfast, Mom had already been up for hours. She sat at the kitchen table, a folded sheet of paper in front of her. "There's going to be a meeting tonight," she said. "Community Center, 7 o'clock. Mayor Crane's calling everyone." "What for?" "To tell us the truth," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled around her teacup. That sentence hit harder than any scream. The truth. After so many years of silence, someone was finally going to say it out loud. The community center hadn't hosted a town meeting in years. Most people avoided gathering after dark, even outside of lockdowns. But that night, nearly 50 of us showed up, faces pale, eyes sleepless, folding chairs lined in rows, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I recognized Dallas and Tanner sitting near the front. Jenny Rogers, our old teacher, sat alone. The air smelled faintly of dust and old floor polish. Mayor Crane stood on the stage with Captain Ford and 3 elders. She looked smaller than I remembered, her dark hair streaked with gray. "Thank you for coming," she began. "I know you've all noticed the changes, the disappearances, the increased pressure during lockdowns." A murmur rippled through the room. "What I'm about to share," she said, "has been kept secret for over 60 years. The words landed like stones dropped in water. My grandfather helped found Graybridge. He and a group of settlers discovered something in the valley, something they couldn't explain. They called it the breach." The word breach hung there, like simple and wrong all at once. "It was a tier," she continued, "between our world and somewhere else. 8 feet high, 3 feet wide. They tried to fill it, burn it, bury it. Nothing worked, and during full moons, things came through." The room erupted in whispers. I caught fragments. Creatures, settlers, lies. Captain Ford stepped forward, a manila folder in his hands. "They documented it," he said. "Strange entities emerging from the breach, always at night. The settlers built barriers, set rules, silence, darkness, lockdown. They believed if the creatures couldn't sense us, they'd return to the breach by dawn. The same rules we'd followed all our lives." Mayor Crane's voice softened. "For decades it worked, but the breach is widening. The creatures are learning." A low hum filled my ears. I glanced at Mom. Her face was bloodless. She knew. She'd always known. Captain Ford closed the folder. "The protocols our grandparents built can't contain them anymore." "What does that mean for us?" Tanner called out. Mayor Crane met his eyes. "It means we may not be able to stay." Her voice didn't shake, but mine did inside. The word stay used to mean safety. Now it meant waiting for something to find the right way in. She raised her chin. "Families with children should prepare to evacuate before the next full moon. We'll provide routes and housing arrangements in neighboring counties." The crowd erupted. Questions, protests, shouted disbelief. Through the noise, her voice carried one last sentence. "The breach can't be left unattended, but the valley is no longer safe." Mom's hand found mine, and I knew before she said anything. We were leaving Graybridge. The walk home from the meeting felt like walking through the shell of a town that didn't realize it was already dead. Porch lights burned across empty yards. Cars sat half-packed in driveways. Through windows, I saw people arguing in tight circles, some crying, some shouting, some just sitting still, stunned. Mom didn't speak until we reached the house. "Tea," she said. "We all need tea." We sat at the kitchen table, steam curling between us. Stella stared into her cup like she expected an answer to rise from the surface. "Grandpa knew about this?" she asked finally. Mom nodded. Your father told me bits of it years ago. I thought it was just folklore until the disappearances started again." "Why keep it secret?" I asked. "Because knowing doesn't make you safer," she said. "It only makes you afraid." Her words hit hard. They were true, and it didn't matter. Fear had already moved in. "We're leaving," Mom said. "Tuesday morning, early. We'll drive to Aunt Sarah's in Arizona." Stella blinked. "That's 2 states away." "It's far enough," Mom replied, "for now." Saturday morning, half the town was gone. The Delgado house stood open, curtains flapping through broken windows. The Rogers place, dark, car missing. Even the church bell stayed silent. At the mill, Tanner was packing tools into the back of his truck. Dallas wasn't there. "He left last night," Tanner said. "Headed west before sunrise. I don't think he's coming back." We boarded up what was left of the mill's front doors. "You heading out too?" Tanner asked. "Mom thinks we should." "She's right." He drove a nail through the last board and leaned back. "Mill's not worth dying for." His voice cracked on the last word. We both heard it. Neither of us said anything. When I returned home, Mom was standing in the living room holding a folded map. The couch cushions were gone, replaced by stacks of canned goods, jugs of water, and boxes labeled emergency. "Stella's upstairs packing clothes," she said. "Help me with the rest." We filled the truck through the afternoon, camping gear, sleeping bags, non-perishables, the important papers sealed in a plastic envelope. The sound of other engines drifted through town, more people leaving before dark. "Mom," I said, tightening the ropes over the tarp, "what if this is temporary? What if they fix the breach?" She looked up from the tie-down strap, her eyes clear, sad. "Then we come back, but I'm not betting your life on it." Sunday evening felt like a funeral. We ate in silence. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like the house saying goodbye. Stella stared at the family photos stacked by the door. "We can't take all of them," she said softly. "Take what matters," Mom answered. "The rest is just things." That night, I couldn't sleep. Through the window, I watched the moon's faint outline climbing behind thin clouds. 3 nights from full. Somewhere out there, the breach was widening. The thought settled heavy in my chest. The next full moon would happen whether we were here or not. Dawn arrived cold and colorless. Mom was already awake, moving through the house with the quiet rhythm of a person saying goodbye. She left the keys on the kitchen counter. Outside, fog clung low to the street. Houses we'd lived beside for 20 years looked hollowed out. A few curtains twitched as we loaded the last boxes. "Everything secure?" Mom asked. "Yeah," checking the ropes again. Stella slid into the passenger seat, backpack hugged to her chest. Mom started the engine. The sound was too loud, too alive for this dying street. As we rolled away, I saw Mrs. Patterson's face in her window, pale, watching. Further down at the corner by the grain mill road, Tanner and Dallas stood by the dock, their figures small in the fog. Tanner lifted a hand in a slow wave. I raised mine back. Dallas nodded once, solemn. That was enough. Mom's voice was quiet. "They're good men." "Yeah," I said. "They are." The truck carried us past the last houses, then into the pine forest. The road narrowed, cracked asphalt fading into gray dirt. I didn't look back. Not yet. For the first few miles, it felt like any morning drive through the woods, dew flashing on leaves, the smell of wet pine. The world was pretending to be normal. Then the forest started to change. The light dimmed, though the sky above stayed clear. The trees leaned inward. Shadows thickened, swallowing the spaces between trunks. Mom's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Stay calm," she said, almost to herself. That's when I saw movement between the trees. A tall, narrow shape keeping pace with the truck, graceful, gliding. At first, I thought it was a trick of light. Then another appeared on the opposite side. Then more. "Mom," I said, "I see them." Her voice didn't break, but her knuckles were white. 8 figures now, shifting through the forest, moving as if the underbrush wasn't real. They didn't run. They matched our speed exactly, as though escorting us. "What are they doing?" Stella whispered. "Watching," I said, though the word didn't feel big enough. Mom pressed the accelerator slightly. The figures adjusted, matching pace without effort. I felt them in my bones before I could define their shapes. Tall, human-adjacent, wrong in proportion, bending around trees without touching them. No sound, not even the crunch of leaves. We drove like that for miles, us on the road, them in the woods, an invisible line between two worlds, both aware of it. Finally, the trees began to thin. The light changed again, returning to normal, bright and gold. The air in the truck shifted, lighter. "They're stopping," I said, looking back. At the edge of the forest, the figures had halted, perfectly still, perfectly aligned among the pines. They didn't follow. Mom slowed the truck, but she didn't stop. "They can't leave the valley," she murmured. We crossed the boundary line. Though none of us could see it, we felt it. The pressure that had lived in our bones for months lifted. I took a deep breath, the first real one in days. Behind us, the creatures stayed where the shadow ended, standing like statues carved out of the forest itself, watching. We drove another 20 miles before the forest gave way to open country. Fields, farms, a distant gas station sign. Civilization. Stella exhaled a sound that was half laugh, half sob. They didn't follow us. Mom kept her eyes on the road. No, but they didn't have to. She was right. The look in those motionless figures, if you could call it a look, said enough. They weren't chasing us. They were marking us. We weren't escaping. We were being released. We made it to the highway by noon. For the first time in years, we passed the leaving Graybridge County sign instead of turning back. Mom's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again and again, but the forest behind us remained still. Traffic was light, just a few other cars loaded down with luggage, all heading west like we were. Some we recognized, the old pharmacist, the Henderson's sedan, a couple of kids from my high school packed into a dented pickup. None of us honked. None waved. We were ghosts already, just in transit. Stella slept most of the way, head leaning against the window, the hum of tires making her breathing slow and shallow. I stared at the landscape flashing by, fields, abandoned barns, half-collapsed motels, each one looking more normal than the last. It should have comforted me. It didn't, because normal doesn't erase what the night remembers. We stopped for gas near a town called Brookvale. The place felt too clean, too unaware of what we'd brought with us. The sky overhead was a calm, indifferent blue. Mom stretched her legs while I filled the tank. She kept her back to the forest at the edge of the lot. "Do you think we're really safe?" I asked. "Safe?" She gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "I think we're somewhere else. That's the best we can do." Inside the gas station, the air smelled of coffee and old paper. A local radio played country music softly from a shelf near the counter. The clerk, mid-30s, friendly eyes, looked up when we entered. "Passing through?" he asked. "Just heading west," Mom said. He nodded. "A lot of folks doing that lately. Heard something about chemical spills out your way." "Yeah," Mom said quickly. "Something like that." The lie came easy, but hearing it spoken out loud made it feel heavier. The world outside Graybridge didn't know. And if we told them the truth, they'd never believe it. When we left, Stella tugged my sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "the radio." "What about it?" The song stopped. I glanced back through the glass door. She was right. The radio had cut mid-verse, silence blooming in its place. The clerk didn't notice. But for a heartbeat, the silence pressed in with that same underwater heaviness we knew too well. Then the music resumed, offbeat by half a second. Mom's face drained of color. "In the truck," she said softly. We didn't argue. We drove for hours after that, too afraid to stop. When we finally did, it was at a rest area surrounded by high desert scrub. The sun was dropping, the light stretched thin and red across the ground. "Just for the night," Mom said. "We'll start again at dawn." We parked far from the other travelers. Stella helped set up the small tent beside the truck while I gathered wood for a fire. The air felt strange, open, yes, but charged like the static before lightning. When darkness fell, the stars came out in impossible numbers. Without the clouded sky of Graybridge, the night looked infinite. The fire crackled. For the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. "Think it's over?" Stella asked. Mom poked the fire with a stick. "I think it's changing." I lay back on the ground, looking at the stars. The idea of space used to comfort me. Tonight, it felt like something staring back. Around midnight, the air shifted. The flames bent sideways, flickering toward the east. The wind carried something faint, like a breath, low and rhythmic, coming from the direction we'd driven. "Do you hear that?" Stella whispered. We listened. Another exhale, softer this time, like the world itself sighing. Mom stood, eyes fixed on the horizon. "Pack up. Now." "But it's nothing," Stella protested. "It's not nothing," Mom said. "It's them." I kicked sand over the fire while Mom loaded the truck. Stella scrambled to grab her blanket, panic finally catching up. By the time the last ember went dark, the sound had changed. Closer, heavier. We climbed in, slammed the doors, and drove. The headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the desert night. Behind us, the wind carried a distant shape, thin, tall, shimmering in the dust. For a second, I thought I saw movement across the ridgeline. Dozens of figures, pale in the moonlight, moving west with us. "They can't leave the valley," I said, voice small. Mom didn't answer. The road twisted, rose, and fell through dry ravines. Each time we dipped low, the air thickened, heavier like before a storm. Stella clutched the dashboard. "Mom, I know," Mom said. "Hold on." The truck crested a rise and plunged down again, tires skidding on loose gravel. When we leveled out, the world behind us was gone. No figures, no sound, just wind. For a while, no one spoke. Then Stella said what I was afraid to ask. If they're following us, what do they want? Mom's grip tightened on the wheel. They don't want. They copy. The word hit me like a cold nail. Copy. The way the radio restarted half a beat late, the way the fire bent toward the east, the way the air moved with that same deliberate rhythm. They were imitating us, learning. By dawn, we reached a motel outside Tucson. Cracked sign, faded paint, vacancy light flickering. Mom parked the truck, killed the engine, and just sat there for a minute, eyes unfocused. Inside, she said finally. We need rest. The clerk didn't ask questions, just handed over a key, smiling too easily. The hallway smelled like bleach and air freshener. Inside the room, I collapsed on the bed, exhaustion finally winning. Stella sat near the window, watching the parking lot. Get some sleep, I told her. I can't, she said. What if they find us? They won't. I tried to sound sure. But at dawn, something woke me. Not sound, pressure. That same invisible hand pressing down on my chest. Across the room, the curtains trembled, though the window was closed. A low hum filled the air, deep enough to feel in my ribs. I looked at Mom. She was sitting upright in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the door. Do you feel it too? I whispered. She nodded slowly. They don't need the valley anymore. And from somewhere beyond the walls, faint, deliberate, came a single, unmistakable sound. Tap. Tap. The same rhythm from our shutters in Graybridge. 3 knocks, then silence. The sun rose over the desert, bright and merciless. Outside, everything looked ordinary. Cars, road dust, the pale motel sign flickering in the breeze, but I knew, as surely as breath itself, that we hadn't escaped anything. We just taught it how to travel. And somewhere out there, under the wide blue sky, the breach was still breathing. Still learning. Still listening.